What up, what up? All my scientists, my artists, my philosophers, my geneticists, my roboticists, my biologists, my archaeologists, my astronomers. Let's get busy. This has been Busy from the Burbs.
3, 2,
Chip.
1. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This has been Busy from the Burbs, broadcasting to you from Osaka, Japan. I'm joined by my co-host, Zanish. Zanish, what's up, brother?
Not much.
How's it going over there?
It's going pretty good.
Did you guys get snow yet?
No, not yet. And
Not
I'm in
yet.
New York.
Has it been unseasonably warm lately?
It's been unseasonably warm and unseasonably cold.
Okay, yeah. Go figure.
And it a little bit in the middle. But where in New York I'm at, that isn't too unusual.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're there in the Northeast, so I would
Right.
figure, like, at this point, you know, Thanksgiving's tomorrow or whatever, you guys are gearing up for
winter.
snowfall soon. Yeah, definitely.
Yes, but sometimes it doesn't snowfall until January.
Right, yeah, it's weird like that.
Yeah,
Strange
upstate
planet.
New York is very sporadic.
Did you listen to the recent Rogan podcast where he had Graham Hancock and that other guy on?
Yeah, that other guy.
Yeah, what was his name? Russell?
I don't
something?
remember.
Russell Johnson, something like that.
Right. It's not as memorable as Graham Hancock, I'll tell you that.
Right, exactly. I have known about Graham Hancock for over 20 years now. A friend of mine had recommended the book that he wrote, Fingerprints of the Gods,
Right.
a long time ago, and apparently he had just finished a second book, which is a follow-up to that one, called Magicians of the Gods. I can't say I've read either of those books. Have you?
No, I haven't.
He was talking about just radical climate change and how that's informed by ancient archaeology, which is has encoded within it in megaliths like knowledge of these cataclysmic events in order to somehow warn the
Right.
future or whatever. I mean, he has a whole thing like.
Right. There's an interesting parallel because I heard of Rupert Sheldrake
Yeah, I'm familiar.
about 20 years ago, who's someone that Joe Rogan had on recently.
Right.
I always thought that Rupert's ideas were interesting, but out there,
Yeah.
see, the Joe
His
Rogan shows.
morphogenetic field theory in particular.
Yeah, Joe Rogan's podcast sometimes goes a little bit too coast to coast for me.
Yeah, it does, right? You wake up and you're like, what am I listening to? Art Bell? Is Art Bell there?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know anything about the subject. What I would like to do is I'd like to read a prominent geologist and archaeologist's reaction, point by point rebuttal. But the problem is that a lot of ideas that are really out there, they won't give them the time of the day to bother.
Right. Yeah. Which is,
And
I mean, on one hand, I can understand it, but on the other hand, it's like, kind of, it's too bad that people aren't doing that.
right. And sometimes credible sounding refutations aren't actually credible.
I'm sorry, what did you say? Cardinal sounding?
No, I said sometimes credible
Credible sounding refutations aren't available.
or aren't credible.
Aren't credible?
Yeah,
Why
just
is that?
because they. Well, I mean, it's the logical fallacy. It's like just because something's logical doesn't necessarily make it true.
Interesting.
Right. So that being said, though, I don't know what I make of Graham Hancock. Like he's got an interesting theory, but Joe Rogan's known for entertaining theories that are real out there.
Yeah. Not to cast aspersions on Joe. Like,
No.
I think Joe is pretty fucking cool as far as people go. I think, though, that he's changed a lot for the better over time. He's much more discerning. Like, ever since he did that sci-fi show where they were trying to
Right.
track down Bigfoot or whatever, he came face to face with a lot of bullshit, and he's kind of sharpened his skeptical skeptical. I don't know,
Right, but
skeptic.
I guess the problem that I have with listening to the podcast is that I didn't hear any critical analysis from him. It
Yeah,
was more of
no.
a snooze fest.
Yeah, it was a total snooze fest. He was like,
Right.
wow, I can't believe it. It's so incredible that two guys like you could be unlocking the secrets of the universe on a podcast. I was like,
Right.
roll eyes. Are you serious, Joe? Come on. Like, let's stop the
Yeah.
cheerleading.
It sucks that he does that because I think it undermines his more legitimate social criticisms when
Yeah.
he. But, you know, he's said that he's out to have interesting conversations and to see where they go. So, I mean, it's his show.
Yeah, right, exactly. But some interesting ideas both from Sheldrake and Hancock and
Right.
that other guy, Russell Peters. I don't know what his name
No,
is.
Russell Peters
Yeah,
is
I
a
know he's a
comedian.
comedian. I know.
Right.
Well, anyway, what else we got? Now you're familiar, or in the pre-interview we were talking about Turkey firing on the Russian plane. You hadn't heard about that?
No, I haven't. I've kind of been working all day. So,
Yes. So at about 1400 hours, let's see, that was yesterday, which is your today, which is 24 November, Tuesday. An airplane, a Russian plane, which was purported to have crossed into. Okay, now I say purported for a very particular reason. We'll get to that in a bit. But it was
right.
purported to have crossed into Turkish airspace, and was fired upon by the Turks after presumably being warned 10 times. They say that they warned them 10 times to get out of the airspace. The Russian jet did not respond in kind and was shot down. Now, here's the rub. Turkey has maintained that wasn't even their airspace. Let's put it that way. And for those who are unfamiliar, Turkey is a member state of NATO. And I hate to beat a dead horse because I just got finished talking about all of this stuff on the last podcast, but it's important that our listeners understand the difference between Warsaw Pact and NATO and so on and so forth. Turkey is a NATO member state, which means, according to the NATO Charter, Article 2, if any NATO state is attacked, that is like an attack on all NATO states and that they are all to come to the defense. Now, I don't foresee, analysts of mine have said that Putin's way too cool-headed to respond in an escalatory fashion, so
Right.
he's not. But it certainly doesn't bode well for the NATO alliance. It makes us look like a little bit cowboyish, and I'll tell you why. Because that airspace, which wasn't even Turkish airspace, was a buffer zone 5 miles inside Syria that was established in June of 2012 when Syrian air defense missiles shot down a Turkish fighter plane that had strayed into Syrian airspace. Okay. Under the revised rules of engagement put into effect then, the Turkish Air Force would evaluate any target coming within 5 miles of the Turkish border as an enemy and act accordingly. They were not even inside Turkish airspace and were destroyed. Then, guess what happens? It gets worse for Turkey. It looks very bad on Turkey here. The pilots eject safely. They know when, in a modern fighter jet, you know when you're being painted, you have IR sensors, you know when there's a missile headed towards you, you eject safely, plane explodes, your parachutes deploy, and you fall uncontrollably to the ground, right? Just on whatever parachute vector that you end up on. Now, get this. What happens? Turkish militiamen fire on the parachuting Russian pilots in a violation of the Geneva Convention, which states very clearly that doing so is is a crime. It's a war crime. Killing at least one of the pilots. And there's footage of the Turk militiamen firing on the red parachute canopy of the Russian pilot.
Right.
So where are we now? Well, one, if it weren't for, I mean, this is what's fucked up, is that the sensible person holding the world together, it would seem, it's not Turkey, it's not NATO, it's Putin. Putin could escalate this, and it could become very, very tragic for the world. But he's not going to do that. And I don't know if the Turks know that, but the Turks are leveraging their position in NATO, and they're making trouble for everyone.
Right.
Now, why was Turkey? Why would they care about Russian pilots coming within 5 miles? Those aren't Syrian pilots, right? Well, this is why. Because Russia had been bombing ISIS supply lines, and Turkey has a vested interest in seeing that Assad gets deposed, in league with Saudi Arabia, in direct conflict with Syria because of a proposed pipeline between Iran, Iraq, and Syria, which would open up a channel for Russian oil to flow out via the Mediterranean. Right now, Russia has some difficulty exporting oil, or maybe it was for Iran. I don't know, but that's the conjecture that I heard, was that this is the reason why we're trying to depose Assad. It has nothing to do with ISIS. It has nothing to do with even Assad, really. When you take the hood off of it, it has to do with shutting down this oil pipeline.
So, devil's advocate.
Shoot.
How does shooting down one plane at all affect that? Because it seems like...
Well, it's an act of war.
Right, but how is that going to help Turkey accomplish their aims? It seems counterproductive, if anything.
That's right. I mean, when you start to like apply pressure to the logic, it breaks. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. What is Turkey doing? Why are they trying to assert themselves? What purpose will that serve? Well, I think I did state that the reason why is because they want that area, that border area.
Right.
They want to control that area because that's their means into and out of Syria. As we all know and has been reported widely, the Turks had been allowing ISIS fighters to use their border to transport into Syria for some time. Now, if airstrikes are shutting down those points of ingress or making life difficult for that stream of black war material and personnel, they're going to intercede in order to make sure that that channel is clear and safe passage is restored.
So
where
it's
are
interesting, but I don't think that Putin can really escalate.
Right.
On a NATO thing, and I think that you're right that if that is the case, then Turkey is leveraging, knowing that Putin can't really do anything, because the reality is that since Turkey is almost de facto a member of the EU, but not quite, that may force Western Europe to stop importing oil from the Russian pipeline, for instance, as like some kind of a sanction.
Right now, Obama is in Holland's ear. I think his name's Holland. Is that the current president of France? I forget what his name was, but
yeah, I don't remember either.
He's talking to him right now because the sanctions are coming up for review right now. So there are Russian sanctions in effect as a result of what's happening in Crimea that were decided upon by all of Europe and NATO or NATO countries. And now they're coming up for review. Obama in the U.S. obviously wants Paris to stand firm with those. But
Right.
what Turkey acting unilaterally in this fashion does is kind of make the entire like sanctions against Russia seem a little like heavy-handed or overblown, or maybe too there's maybe too strong. So what that might do is convince certain countries within the EU, because Turkey is not in the EU. I mean, they might be quote unquote de
Right.
facto just because they're a NATO member state, but they
Right.
were quite publicly and blatantly excluded from the EU. Members in government officials in Germany and in France. I mean, it's kind of laughed off. The idea that Turkey would ever be included in the EU is kind of that's kind of a
Right.
joke to them. That will never happen. However, with them continuing to stir the pot in this fashion, what that does is maybe European nations, maybe they put less stock in the NATO alliance and start to consider dealing with Russia on different terms, maybe more, I don't know, friendly terms.
Right. Well, one thing that I would say is that it's kind of hard to kick Turkey out of NATO, though.
You can't. Nah, you can't. You can't kick them out. That's.
Right.
I'm curious to go back historically and find out what was the reaction to NATO members when the EU was formed.
See, I thought that NATO was a defensive
Yes.
alliance, much in the way that a lot of the pre-World War One countries had defensive alliances.
Mm-hmm.
And so Russia flying into pseudo-Turkish airspace is not an act of war
No.
by anyone's definition.
If they fired on
Right.
Turkish aircraft,
Right.
maybe.
So, I mean, if Russia responds to this in an escalatory fashion, I'm not sure that NATO's stipulations even apply, since it was Turkey who was the initial aggressor.
Right. There was an official statement that came out from NATO shortly after this happened, which said that we stand with our NATO partners. So it seems like even if that was the case, like what I foresee happening here
Right.
behind the scenes is Turkey's going to get admonished by probably the United States and whichever other countries hold sway in NATO. They're going to get
Right.
yelled at and get their little ass beat behind the curtain. And then, they're obviously going to release this document saying, oh, everything's fine. We stand by our NATO members and we want to de escalate the entire situation, which
Right.
is what the statement said.
So, I mean, I don't know. The whole thing seems like it's going to be a wash.
Yeah, it's going to be a wash. Putin's
There's too
not going to do
much.
anything stupid.
Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? I think that if something were to break out, I
Mhm.
think that China would have to side with the West because of economic considerations. How much of their GDP is reliant on exports to the United States and Western Europe is probably, just off the top of my head, 75% of their economy.
You have to wonder where is the cleave? Where is the cleave point between economic motivations and ideological motivations? Because yeah, okay, they might side with the West for economic reasons, but that's not really what defines sides in a war all the time, is it?
Yeah, but I think that it has to, because China seems to be long-term positioning, like hundreds of years of strategy in advance.
Yeah.
And I think the economic partners, because I don't even know like what R- Russia and China would ideologically have in common.
Well,
Honest,
communism.
but is China really communist anymore?
They are whatever serves them at the time that you ask them.
Right. See, I think that, I don't know. I think Russia may be China's useful idiot.
In the same way that like North Korea is South Korea's useful idiot.
Yeah, maybe. Um, just thinking about it because I mean the UK was definitely the United States' useful idiot going into Iraq.
Yes.
Tony Blair got played like a puppet.
Oh my God, they had their hand so far up his ass
Yeah.
that they could pull on his tonsils. It was pretty bad. But
Yeah.
then again, we were all duped into Iraq, really. And
Well, I mean, a lot of intelligence services sided with
you could
what the U.S. government was saying.
you could say that Colin Powell was the Bush administration's useful idiot, and that's like that's even more loaded because Colin Powell is a fucking smart guy. You know what I
Right.
mean? But they convinced him to go before the UN and deliver that yellow cake uranium from Nigeria story. Hook, line, and sinker. There was no question. You just
Right.
went ahead and did it.
Well, there must have been other things going on behind closed doors that, like backroom deals or something, or maybe he owed somebody
Okay, maybe
a favor that was so big that.
that could be. He's since divested himself from the Bush administration wholesale, though. I think he made several high-profile statements to this effect.
I don't think that anybody ever let him off the hook in the end, though.
No, I think it's a blemish on his record.
Yeah.
That's for sure, and it'll
Right.
always be there. And
Yeah.
it's just something that he, in terms of his legacy,
Right.
needs to do, whatever he can in retrospect to kind of minimize. But it's always going to be there. There's no going back on that.
Right. Assuming that he cares about his legacy.
What I find interesting is that when we were trying to go into Iraq, there was all of this fanfare, all of this circus in order to justify the invasion, right? And there were Hans Blimmer, or whatever his name was, the weapons inspector, the UN team, the multiple meetings with the UN, with all the nations, pleading the case, blah, blah, blah. But when it came to Syria and their attempt to railroad us into Syria, there was none of that. It was all much less high profile, either as a direct result of what kind of happened the last time or otherwise, but there wasn't so much fanfare. It was much more downplayed.
Well, I think that it sort of had the that SOPA public reaction. But I'm not sure that the Republicans got so becoming Dr. No to everything that Obama opposed, that since Obama was for going into Syria at the time, they probably had to just choose the opposite side. Plus, Obama's own party really sold him out several times.
In what regard?
So, one of the first, I got in an argument with someone a while back, and they were saying, he lied about everything. He didn't even close Guantanamo Bay.
Thanks, Obama.
One of the first executive orders that Barack Obama issued was to close Guantanamo Bay, but the Democrats voted down almost unanimously to fund that project.
Wow.
So without money, how could he get it done? And both parties voted against. Yeah, I did some digging into that, and I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. The inter-party warfare is like some of the most interesting stuff, because there is where you can, like a microscope, using like a reverse microscope, the policies that they're debating can be used to kind of tease apart the allegiances and the alliances within the parties themselves. It's pretty interesting. And they don't happen that often. That's the thing. You're not privy to a lot of that inter-fighting, because a good party or a good organization, like NATO, for example, with this Turkey debacle, they're going to keep all of that behind closed doors. You're never going to know about the
Right.
Turkish general who is responsible for authorizing that missile attack being yelled at or demoted or fired or anything. You're not going to see any of that. All you're going to see is the final
Right.
finished product, and everything's going to look smooth. But when you do
That's
get that opportunity, it is eye-opening.
hmm
Yeah. Okay, let's see. What else do we have? There was something in the lead up to the original Syrian invasion that was planned. There was all of this fanfare. The media was trying to whip the public into a frenzy, and support for an invasion was at a meager 39%, and with 60% opposing, 1% not decided or whatever.
right.
Now we have that was in June 2014. Now that demographic, that percentage is switched. Now you have something like 69% supporting the invasion or ground troops in Syria, and 30% opposed. Now, thankfully, people who take these polls are not responsible for determining foreign policy or where troops go. One thing, as a former Marine, what pisses me off is the fact that people who have no vested interest in the military or even carry out military orders or are deployed to these war zones and have to face these horrors, these people are the ones that are deciding whether or not we go to war, not the war fighters themselves, which pisses
Right.
me off. But with the first Syrian invasion that was planned, friends of mine who were with Patriot missile units on the border of Turkey and Syria, ready to go in once we were given the green light, there were some inconsistencies with the case that was being made. We tried to make the case that he's using chemical weapons against his own people in the Ghouta chemical attack, which was never substantiated, that was by the Assad forces that perpetrated that gas attack. And actually, contrary to the narrative that was attempted to be advanced by Western media, by CIA, by individuals within the United States government in order to whip up this international sentiment to justify a ground invasion of Syria, the hallmarks of the Ghouta chemical attack were almost identical to a chemical attack against Assad forces 3 months earlier, which goes to show you that when it comes to Syria right now, I've seen more cloak and dagger, Cold War-esque disinformation, distraction, deception, and just downright lying than I had seen or heard of in all of my years growing up in the 80s during the Cold War and in reading about the Cold War since. Like, there is a full-on spy war happening there in that region. Turkey's involved, Saudi Arabia, ISIS, Daesh, FSB, CIA. They're all there in that region. And it all has to do, presumably, with this pipeline between Iran, Iraq, and Syria.
Right. Well, there's trade sanctions heavily against oil exports from at least Iran, right?
Right, yes.
And it's been no secret that Russia has been black market trading partners with Iran, and that's why we put up that naval blockade. Correct?
Where was the naval blockade? In the Persian Gulf?
I believe so. You'll have to look into that, but I'm pretty sure there was one.
I'm not sure. I wonder how relevant are all of these petroleum nations in the wake of renewable energy revolution.
Let's see here.
I mean, how many years until a renewable energy revolution actually becomes militarily advisable?
It's a good question.
The Germans seem to think that that time is now, and that's why I think they generate the most electricity per capita via renewable resources than any other country on planet Earth. I mean, they're ahead of the curve. They see it coming, and they want to be prepared.
Well, I think that France has 80% of their electricity from nuclear
Right?
now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that's been for some time.
right. I think they have the lowest energy costs in Europe too, if I remember correctly.
Nuclear poses its own issues, but I mean,
Why?
ironically, you never hear of a nuclear accident in France. Oh, I
Right.
haven't. I don't know.
Well, they're the new type of reactors. Like all the incidents are those 1970s style reactors.
Mm.
It's the I forget what they're called. I watched a documentary on it. There's some kind of breeder reactor that where they produce almost no waste.
Mm.
Like the fuel cells recharge themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way that it works is that it just heats in on itself and it boils water, which turns to steam and then mechanically powers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's converting mechanical energy to, and it's like a self-collapsing system. I don't know if it's thorium or not. I think thorium reactors might be something in the future that we don't have yet, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't recall. I'll have to go back into that.
Um, I have a question totally out of left field right now.
Sure.
Um, it's a sex question.
That is out of left field.
Yeah, where it's like totally, because a friend of mine is asking me to help him with something, and I can't get into too many specifics, but
Right.
this is the question. Like, you know how there are different sexual fetishes?
Yes.
Yeah. Ass play is a thing, right? That's like an
Yes.
actual category of fetish.
Well, I don't know. I guess I have a problem with the word fetish.
Well, what is it? I mean, what is this word, this phrase, ass play? Like,
Oh,
what would you categorize that as?
anything with regarding stimulation of the anal region.
Yeah, but I mean, what do you categorize that as? What category do you put that in? You don't put that into fetish.
Well, see, fetishes, I understand it, requires that the person has to have that to become aroused.
Okay.
So, I mean, I guess it would fall under kink.
Hmm.
But even then, that applies. I think that, I don't know. You know what I mean? It puts something on there. It may just be an equal part of someone's repertoire so that it doesn't really stand out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think kink implies that they have a special thing for it that's above and beyond everything else in their sexual repertoire.
Wait, so kink and fetish, these are two different things,
Yeah, I
categorically
think so.
different things.
Yeah, a kink is just something that I think that's out of the normal that gets you off. And a fetish is something that falls under that category, but also is it's mandatory. So a guy with a foot fetish couldn't achieve sexual arousal without engaging with a woman's feet.
Oh, I see.
Right.
Mm.
I think I don't know if the DSM gets into fetish. It may, but I'm pretty sure that's how psychology defines fetish.
Interesting.
So, was that the only question regarding it,
Yeah, that
or
was the only question that I had regarding that. I mean, we can move
right?
on from there. That was
I don't
all
know.
that I had.
I think that anal is the new oral.
Anal is the new oral. Anal has been really popular amongst religious extremists, whether they're Orthodox Muslims or hardcore Christians.
Well, I think that they're trying to loophole the system where they're saying that anal isn't real sex, so it doesn't violate the religious script.
Hmm.
Because I know that they prefer that, at least in certain places, Muslims prefer that young men have sex with animals over women out of wedlock.
Hmm. Wait, say that one more time.
um, so as I understand it, there's sects of Islam that prefer that young men commit acts of bestiality rather than have sex out of wedlock with women.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, but you know, it's
I guess you're gonna do what you're gonna do, right?
right. Well, I mean, you know, there's just different. Look how many flavors of Christianity there are with their own taboos, like the
Hmm.
Jehovah's Witnesses and blood transfusion.
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And the Mormons with their magic underwear. I don't know what they prohibit, but
Hmm.
I'm sure it's some weird thing. And they probably allow some weird things as loopholes. You know, with the Mormons, yeah, I guess you could say that allowing guys to have multiple wives is a way around the Christian taboo of extramarital sex.
That's exactly what it is, right? So they're
Right,
looking to find some way to um, religiously justify infidelity on some
right.
level, which actually then turns out kind of to be. I'm not going to make a case for or against it, but from where I sit, from the outside looking in, it makes. I don't know. It makes things less complicated. I don't know if that's a bad thing. Maybe infidelity, strictly speaking, this should be a complicated thing.
Yeah,
But satisfying your evolutionary urge to procreate that has been
right.
cultivated and bred into your DNA over the course of however many million years. Yeah, that's difficult to break, and I think we put a lot of stress on uh, monogamy, and it's great that we're able to achieve it, but let's not delude anyone into thinking that we don't get there by way of a lot of stress. I mean, a lot of
Right.
stress can come as a result of that. So,
Well, you know, polygamous relationships almost always seem to only go one way.
what's that?
You know, it's like you end up with a husband with like 12 wives, but none of those wives are allowed to be married to other men.
Yeah, right. There's that double standard there.
Yeah, and it usually seems like it's
So then they'll
old
just
guys with power who soak up all the young women.
right, and then they'll just what will happen invariably. These women seek extramarital affairs, right? So they just end up canceling out instead
Right,
of having more men engaged in extramarital affairs. Now, because it's legal for them to have many wives,
right.
you'll have women who are doing it.
I mean, I'd imagine this has to be starting in China at this point
Yeah, you
because
think, right?
there's a
There's
lot more men than
there's
women.
more men than women, right?
I don't know if it's 500,000 or something like that.
There's actually been a tradition of wife sharing in Asia and places in Asia for some time.
Interesting.
This used to be like a commonplace thing where there would
Right.
be multiple husbands and one wife. So
Hmm. So back to the other stuff
mm.
because I don't know where to go with this.
Back to the lecture at hand.
Right. I don't know. I'm just thinking about how or which direction the world's going and how much money is at stake and how much more sense economic warfare makes than physical warfare anymore.
Right.
No one benefits from a second showdown between the United States and Russia.
No.
But
And I
I've
mean I would extend that to say that any conventional war between any two conventional militaries
right,
now at this point in the world, any two nuclear armed conventional militaries serves no one.
right. I would say though that unless nukes are involved, Russia can't win against the United States.
Right.
They have no way to strike us here without
They have
nuclear
nukes.
weapons, without nukes. But if they use nukes, then it's all over for everybody anyway.
We don't really have the means by which to attack them in any meaningful way either, though.
Well, why not? We have all kinds of bases all over Western Europe.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that we are just going to march in a ground invasion force and start taking Russian cities.
I don't
And-
think that we need to do that. I
No.
mean,
Right. Well, that's now. Now you're going back to the economic warfare. Yeah, that makes sense. Like that's how we wage war against Russia. We know that. It's like there's
Yeah.
no okay. Russia can't attack us militarily. What can
Right.
Russia really do? Well, they have more resources than us. They just don't know how to fucking exploit them.
yeah, but their main resource seems to be oil. And that seems to be going, its value seems like it's probably going to start dying soon.
Yeah. I don't know what Russia's problem is. They have so much natural resource, and they just don't have the industry to correct. They have all of the pieces. They're just not. They can't organize.
Right.
They can't get it to get their shit together.
Well, that's what happens when thugs take over all the industries in your country after the old government collapses, right?
Or legitimate businesses take over the industries, and then
Right.
you throw them in jail, and you take over the industries, and you
Right.
renationalize like. What was the name? Rosgas or whatever it was called. The
Yukos,
I forget what the name was. Is that the guy's name?
Yukos was the big oil company
Maybe it was
in
that.
the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
Right.
They threw the magnate, the oligarch in jail, and just nationalized everything. Which, when they say nationalized, I guess that means that they privatized it under Putin's name or whatever. I mean,
Right.
people often state, yeah, well, Putin's just a mobster. Yeah, he is. That's true. But how does that change things? He's still the leader of that country somehow, going on like 16 years. Not sure how that works. What is his title now anyway? Is he the president?
I thought he was the prime minister.
Is he the prime minister now? Like, what is he? He goes back and forth, is constantly switching roles. Like, in how many years, will he be prime minister? It's just.
Huh. Do you know he's only 5'7"?
Yeah, he's a short guy, but he's not to be fucked with. I mean,
That doesn't stop him from killing bears.
yeah, he's a little
Which
he's
I
a little
doubt.
man though. He's definitely he's a little guy. He's intimidating though.
I'm trying to see what his title is now on Wikipedia.
Head penis.
Oh no, he's the president again.
Oh, he's president again. Okay, it's like
Right.
days of the week. We need to.
I can't pronounce his name, Dmitry. Right.
Medvedev.
Medvedev.
Medvedev. He was the
That sounds
last
made up.
president, right? And he was only in for a short time, like maybe 2-3
Yeah, he
years,
was.
right? And then Putin came back.
Yeah, well, Putin was the prime minister of Russia.
Mm-hmm. What I always am interested in is not necessarily the figureheads like the Bush or the
Right.
Putin, but I want to know who are the forces behind the scenes. Who are the people we don't know about? Who are the people pulling the strings? Who are the puppet masters? Who are the directors of the charade, the financiers, the banks, whoever they are, pulling the strings, making things happen? Like your Karl Roves and your Dick Cheneys. Like never more so than in the Bush 2 administration could you really see that the figurehead in Bush was really, he was neutered. He was ultimately powerless. He was just a voice box. And really the intelligence that was at work there behind the scenes was in your Cheney or your Wolfowitz
Right.
or your Richard Pearl or whatever that neocon six were. The
Donald
Sinister Six.
Rumsfeld.
Right?
Right.
Condi Rice, so on and so forth.
A lot of those names are actually on documents that were sent to Bill Clinton from PNAC,
What's PNAC?
the Project for a New American Century, which is the neocon think tank.
That's
They've
right.
they've since taken all their stuff offline.
Right, and for good reason, because they said shit like, we will need a catalytic event like Pearl Harbor in order to galvanize American public support
Right.
to rein in the new American century. Like,
Right.
that shit that's the type of shit that conspiracy theorists love to see. They look at that,
Right.
and it's immediately like an indictment of the system at large. And they'll just, they jump right on it.
Right.
Every time, without fail.
But what was his name there? Who was Rahm Emanuel said something similar.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah, after like right before, I think it was when Obama was still the president elect.
Mm-hmm.
And then conservative talk radios kept saying they're gonna fake something in the first 100 days of Obama's administration. You watch, and then nothing happened.
Lol.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I just want.
Wait, Rahm Emanuel said that?
Yeah, he said never waste a good tragedy or something like that.
I'll never let a good tragedy go to
Tragedy go to
waste.
waste.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
Was he the one that actually said that?
Well, no, like he basically said that don't be surprised if there's Obama's administration that's exploitable.
Oh, he did say that. Never let a serious crisis go to waste. Rahm's rule.
Right.
Wow. Interesting. That is kind of a who is the neocon philosophical like influencer or like influence that to which all neocons kind of owe their philosophical lineage. It all goes back to this one guy.
William Crystal.
No, even before him. Neocon.
Maybe Henry Kissinger.
No, it was before him. Neocon.
Oh, Teddy Roosevelt.
No, this was an actual like academic.
Oh. Well, I know that like why the economically they kind of go a little bit Rothbardy.
Yeah, Strauss. That's
Strauss.
Leo
Okay.
Strauss, right? Seems like a real Straussian thing to say. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Like
Right.
Leo Strauss and his students. This is from the wiki. Neoconservatism draws on several intellectual traditions. The students of political science, Professor Leo Strauss, 1899 and 1973, comprise one major group. Eugene Shepard notes that much scholarship tends to understand Strauss as an inspirational founder of American neoconservatism. Strauss was a refugee from Nazi Germany who taught at the New School for Social Research in New York and at the University of Chicago. He stressed the crisis of the West consists in the West having become uncertain of its purpose. Goes on to espouse the notion of the noble lie or the noble truth. What is that? The
Noble Lies.
The Noble Lie, yeah.
Is from Plato's Republic.
Right. Yeah, he invokes that a lot, and
Right.
Anyway, interesting character. It's kind of like the Sith. Like if the Sith were to be like a political party or some kind of intellectual political tradition,
Right.
Leo Strauss would most certainly be like in the ranks of the Sith. Like this guy was,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's interesting because I get in these situations with people who have very violent opinions on the internet about political philosophy and financial philosophy and stuff like that. And when I start talking to them, it becomes quickly exposed that they have never read any source material ever.
Yeah. No, they're looking for memes. These are the meme textuals or intellectuals.
Is that a millennial thing? Because I don't notice that with people over 35.
Millennial intellectuals? Yeah, it probably is because there's a shorter attention span, and it's just
Right.
people want easily digestible information that they can look at on Instagram and incorporate or integrate into their Weltanschauung easily and smoothly and without much hard work. People don't want to work. I mean, that's what
Right.
it really comes down to. And that's why, here we are faced with
Yeah.
China emerging as such an economic superpower because these are people that just didn't give a fuck or gave a fuck while we didn't give a fuck, or vice versa. And now they are where they are. But
Right.
what do they produce? That's to say, that's an indictment of millennials. I mean, if we're going to indict the millennials, then surely we should. That does not fall at the feet of the millennials. It falls at the feet of the baby boomer generation. They're the ones that fucking gave birth to this. They're the
Well,
problem, in my
yeah,
opinion.
to some extent, or maybe very early Generation X.
Okay, yeah.
I'm at the very tail end of Generation X, the absolute tail end of it.
How
But
old are you?
I'm in my late 30s at this point. But
Okay.
right. So that being said, though, it's kind of interesting to me that this whole millennial baby boomer dynamic,
Mm-hmm.
because Generation X, I believe, begins in 1960. So anybody who was early Generation X could have easily had a kid before 1980.
Right.
So the people who were millennials who were turning like their early 20s, that would be like right in line for millennials, I think. So I think it's like kind of a shared thing between early Gen X, but most of the people that I've met who were born in the early to mid 60s,
Mm-hmm.
they don't seem like Gen Xers to me.
What constitutes a generation?
I believe just 20 years, but
20 years.
like a generational identity is a completely different thing. See, Generation X was supposed to be, the slacker generation,
Mm-hmm.
the MTV generation.
Yeah, well, that was more. That wasn't '60s. That was like
No, but
'80s.
right, but Generation X runs people who were born between 1960 and 1980, right?
Okay.
So anybody born in the 70s was, at least an aware human being when MTV exploded.
What do you call someone that was born between 1980 and 2000?
I think that's Generation Y.
Generation Y. Ah, yes,
And
Generation
the
Y.
millennials
Millennials,
are just,
anyone after 2000.
no, 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 no. I believe that millennials are actually the people who came of age right around or shortly after the year 2000.
Hmm.
So I think that the millennials are a subsect of Generation Y.
Ah, I see.
Hold on. Right. Let's see here.
Subsect.
Yeah, right. A millennial is a person reaching young adulthood around the year 2000. So I would
Mm-hmm.
guess,
What constitutes
probably,
young adulthood? 18.
I would probably say around 16.
Okay. Well, childhood is a very short span of time, relatively, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
What is it? Just like age 1 to 16. Like
Yeah,
by the
more.
time you have enough wherewithal to actually maybe begin to enjoy yourself, it's gone. Like you're saddled with responsibility, student loan debt, debt to your society, so on and so forth.
Yeah, my generation kind of shucked that and said, "Fuck that."
Yeah.
The Gen Xers generally did not get themselves into that bad of a position.
No, they didn't, right? And they
Well,
learned, they knew what to
yeah,
do given their situation. Like there wasn't,
right.
I mean,
Pl-
this is kind of iconified by the 90s film Reality Bites with,
Yeah.
I don't know, a number of actors.
Well, not to mention the fact that Generation X basically took all the fat IT jobs
Hmm.
leading up to Y2K and got in all the experience. So all those people who are now senior developers and senior DBAs and stuff like that are largely Gen Xers,
Hmm.
almost
Yeah.
probably exclusively at this point.
They're clogging the industry to the point where, like, no one else can get in, which is why,
Yeah,
we have this crisis of conscience insofar as the economic future of America is concerned. And that's what has kind of given rise to, I mean, if it weren't for that clogging that
right.
happened, we may not have gotten Google.
Yeah, But the interesting thing though is that I don't think it's so much clogging here. It's India and Middle Eastern people who are willing to write code snippets over the internet for dirt cheap. At least as far as computer programming goes, right? Like the competition from Asia and other places and
Yeah,
is really
it's quite fierce, and they'll come over here, on student
temporarily.
visas and so on and so forth. And
Right.
I am not against that at all. I welcome them to come to the country. I just want them to stay in the country. So
Right.
it's important to incentivize them to that end. But I mean, the clogging that I see is due to the Gen Xers who were able to get in early and then just stay, and then they don't innovate. That's the thing with
Right.
Gen Xers. They're comfortable, like you said, they're lazy to a fault, and they just want to maintain the status quo. They're like, if millennials are a subsect of Generation Y, Gen X is most certainly a subsect of the baby boomer generation.
Well, no, the baby boomers are people who were born between 19 or like right in the period
1940
after
and
World War II.
yeah,
Right.
1970 or what? I mean 1960.
Yeah, it would probably even more just be between 1945 and 1950 is where the bulk of the baby boomers come from.
Yeah,
Like everybody,
1951, 52.
right? Yeah, something like that. Everybody came back from World War II, and
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard to see really what the future holds. I can see certain things that may happen. I mean, we're going to have to come to terms with this. I mean, what do you foresee for? I mean, I'm looking at Islam now. Okay,
right.
what happens with Islam? One,
Well,
it's not going to conquer the world and spread Sharia law everywhere. It's not going to happen. So what's the alternative? The alternative, as I see it, is a turn towards secularism. Everybody calming the fuck down and relaxing. Like that's what I see.
well, what's going to happen is that I think this is going to be really interesting. Is that you're going to see these a lot of people talk about moderate Muslims.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see a breed of light Muslims in the way that you see
Yes.
like
Light Catholics.
cafeteria Christians, I guess
Yeah.
they call them.
Catholics. Like
Yeah,
the vast majority of Catholics in the United States are lay Catholics. They never go to church. They just
right,
go through the motions. They might do first communion, blah blah blah, but that's it. They're not,
right.
there every week. That's what I see it happening as well, and I see it happening distinctly as an American phenomena that then carries over, hopefully, to Europe.
Well, it's probably happening in Europe to some degree too. But it's like
Yeah, it's got to be.
look at all second generation immigrants in the United States.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. They
Nobody
firmly
really
reject their the traditions of their parents
right,
almost by instinct. They're embarrassed by it. Really.
right. See, I don't know. It kind of drives me nuts when people accuse white people of appropriating black culture because
Hmm.
obviously that goes back and forth so much that it's ridiculous to point out one side instead of the other.
Yeah. Especially with all like, the
Right.
interracial marrying, and like everyone is like,
Yeah.
everyone's a hybrid or soon to be hybrid. Whether you're intermarrying black or white, or
Right.
black or Asian, white or black, whatever. Like, we're all just gonna turn out Brazilian somehow in the future. I've
Right.
heard people talk about that, how like the ethnic racial makeup of the future United States is going to look a lot more like Brazil and a lot less like Northern Europe as time goes on. And
Right.
is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't think so. It
Well,
just is what it is, and there's always going to be white people. There are always going to be black people. There are always going to be every individual, race of person. There
right.
will be these people. They will survive.
S-
So
See,
just relax.
it's interesting that the biological melting pot happened before the cultural one.
Yeah, there's a lag time there, right?
Well, I mean, if you go to New York City,
which arguably is the most
segregated place on the planet.
segregated place, but it's also, I mean, the most integrated.
That's true, but it's like you had you had Little Italy, Chinatown. You had Irish sections, Italian sections. It's probably true in Boston too.
Yeah, I mean, there are sections, but the point is, like, they're in the same place. Like,
Right.
they're occupying the same area, as opposed to, like, if you go overseas, I mean, there are tribal areas or whatever, but there's not a lot of melting pot happening
Right.
in the Middle East or in Africa or in, I don't know, India.
Yeah.
China. And name any other country except the United States. No one else is doing it like we're doing it. We are the experiment. We are the grand experiment, the great experiment or whatever. And it's taking place. Yeah, it's taking some time, but eventually we'll get it together.
I think not China, Canada and Australia are doing it to a lesser extent.
Uh-huh.
Canada has some very Chinese cities. Like I think Vancouver, if I remember correctly, has a very, very high Chinese population.
I think Vancouver, of the cities in the world. Oh no, that's Brazil. Brazil has the highest population of Japanese people outside of Japan
Right.
in the world.
Yeah. So Toronto has 500,000 Chinese and Vancouver has 400,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering what the total population of Vancouver is at the moment. Hold on. Let me just. It's kind of
603,000.
And 410,000 of them are Chinese. That's 2/3.
Yeah. I don't know if that's true, that 2/3 of them are Chinese.
Well, the statistics come from.
Is that what it says, statistically?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
400,000. So, I don't know, 4% of the entire Canadian population is Chinese. 4.3%. So 1.5 million Chinese people in Canada. It's kind of interesting.
A lot of Chinese people.
Right.
But anyway, do you have anything to promote right now, Zanish? We're at the tail end of the broadcast right now.
Yeah, no, I don't.
Okay, well, if you have any questions for Zanish, again, there were some issues with what you said in the last podcast.
We're there.
Yeah, alienating certain groups of people. If you have any hate mail, please send it forward to Zanish, and he'll address those issues on a case-by-case basis.
Oh, I was unaware.
No,
Are there comment? Oh.
I'm totally bullshitting you. But no, thank you very much for listening. Whoever's listening right now, we appreciate it. Please click PayPal, donate, give us $5, $10, $15, whatever you can do. We'd appreciate it. We are completely run out of pocket right now, and every bit of money that we can get helps to sustain the broadcast, make it sustainable, so we can continue on into the future. Again, thank you very much to my co-host Zanish. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
No problem.
And we'll catch you all next time. All right? World peace.